Thank you so much for joining us, Jamie. It's such a pleasure talking to you. I was looking forward to this conversation so much. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Great to be here, Nausheen, and yeah, shout out to all your listeners out there.
I'd love to get into it and ask you to introduce yourself, talk about your very interesting journey so far in the Australian military. And also, is it okay if I call it the military, or is it better to like specifically call it the Air Force?
Yeah, well, military is fine, but it's actually the army, where the part
Mm,
that I'm in, because
mm.
the army owns all the helicopters. So the Air Force in Australia actually gave them over to the army, back in the late 80s. So we wear green, but we fly.
Okay, cool. That's something I didn't know.
Yep. But yeah, happy to introduce sort of my journey. So um, I've been in the military for 22 years or so now, and I started off as a junior officer. We go to our military academy, which in Australia is called Duntroon. It's a bit like Sandhurst or similar to West Point in the States. And you do all your officer training, and then after that, I got into into the aviation corps, and did my pilot training, and then you start getting into all your different roles, your leadership roles after that. So I was posted all around Australia. We deployed around the world in different capacities. We supported, East Timor, the Middle East, all types of missions that Australia contributed to over the last 20 years. And so that put me in different roles with other nations, with UK, the US, but also then leading my team. And my last large leadership role was as the commanding officer of our largest helicopter regiment, which was the 5th Aviation Regiment in North Queensland in Australia. And we operated Chinooks and MH90 Taipan troop lift helicopters. So that was my last big leadership role, with about 600 people in that unit. So that's sort of my journey up to date.
That's amazing. And do you think that it's easy to transfer the skill set, specifically when it comes to leadership? Do you think it's easy to transfer that skill set over um, from one domain to another? And here it's interesting for me to ask this question because I've jumped from different fields, from one field to another most of my life. I've gone from PR and marketing to improv and theater and film, and then into entrepreneurship, and now into leadership coaching, leadership communications coaching. But and I've always seen that the way to really be able to evolve is to be able to transfer skill sets, transfer skills that you've learned doing one thing into another thing that you might want to start, so that you're not starting from scratch. But that said, everything that I've done has to do in one way or the other with communication. So for me, it was easy to draw that, to pull that thread through my diverse experiences. But then when I think about experiences in the military, to me, from the outside, they seem to be quite different in some very fundamental ways from an experience that a corporate leader might have in an organization. So do you see parallels where I don't? And do you see that it's an easy or a linear process transferring those leadership skills from the military to the world of business or entrepreneurship?
Well, if you break it down, there's a lot of things that we do as military leaders which you need to do in business. So, as a leader, I have to communicate, or I have to plan, I have to orchestrate, I have to figure out the strengths of my team. I have to rapidly form groups onto projects or deployments or missions. I have to manage risk. I have to communicate outcomes. I then have to deliver orders, which is a formal way of delivering a vision statement, or a mission that like a CEO would to a
Mm-hmm.
company. And I have to sell. I have to sell, right? what I have to sell the plan we're doing and why we're doing it and for the reasons that we're doing it so that people understand and they're on board. The difference, so all those skills are about people and about purpose and about communication. But the difference being is that in the military, we wear a rank that's sitting there on our chest or on our shoulders. And so you have legal authority to tell people to do what you're asking them, which is different to business world. You have positional authority in business world, but in the military, you have a legal authority and a hierarchy. So in a way, people kind of have to do what you say legally, but it doesn't mean that that's the reason they should be doing it. So if you're a good leader in the military, you only use your rank and authority 1% of the time. Okay. The rest of the time is you're using your leadership skills. And so if you're actually a good leader, those skills are transferable straight away into all different endeavors where you have to lead people to solve problems and communicate outcomes and achieve goals. So it's actually surprisingly transferable from what I've seen and experienced, and understanding how you employ those skills in different contexts is the key. It's just about, like you said, with your experience, it's bringing that thread across into the other domains. I think it's the same in our work.
That makes a lot of sense. I love what you said about how a good leader in the military will only use that legal authority 1% of the time. And that is very encouraging for an outsider to hear, because those are the lines that I was thinking along, that now, especially now, one hopes and sees the concept of leadership changing from someone who gives orders to someone who empowers their team, from someone who says, do it because I'm saying this is the way to do it, to someone who might actually disagree and commit. They might not even agree with the ideas that their team brings forth, but say that that's okay. You don't have to do it my way. And I commit to supporting you, even if I don't agree with your idea. And I find it hard to believe that would happen in the military, perhaps not so much. So that's really what I was struggling with, thinking that maybe 20 years ago, leadership in the corporate world might have resembled leadership in the military a lot more. And I'm sure leadership in the military was very different then too. I don't know about Australia, but I'm just talking like in general terms. And now, at least from my exposure to the corporate world and the entrepreneurship world, which is what I'm closer to, I can see that the concept of leadership is definitely changing, and old school leaders are not respected anymore. They're not looked up to anymore just because they're leaders. So have you seen, it seems actually from your answer that you've already seen that change happen in the military as well, which is really fascinating.
Yeah, well, we're in a transitional phase, particularly in the Australian Army. We're bringing in the new ways of doing business as a leader into how we teach our junior leaders. So over the next period, those people will be progressing up the chain, and it's a new era, we're hoping. And because we need to actually solve problems differently and lead differently for the way we're going to fight in the future as a military. And it can't be just the hierarchical authoritarian approach to actually solve problems when we're operating across all different domains, cyber, information warfare, all types of different ways that conflicts are being prosecuted now. You have to solve problems in a disaggregated fashion with empowered small teams that need to move quickly and collaborate, and you need to be flat and fast. You can't just be sitting in a hierarchical structure with, the 4-star general over the top issues the orders and all the minions scurry away and do the job. It's not going to be the way of the future. So we need that new approach to leadership, and that's why we're getting after it.
That's very, very encouraging to hear, very refreshing to hear. So I want to think back. I want us, well, it would be you thinking back, but I'm very curious to know about your early days as a leader, and whether there was a moment specifically when you were communicating as a leader, because that's what I really love talking about, how leaders communicate and how they can communicate better. So, was there a moment that you could recall where you were talking to your team and you felt that there has been a transition, there has been a change in the way that you talk, the way that you communicate, and you've transitioned into communicating as a leader? Do you remember a moment like that? And what was that like?
Well, I can give you a moment when I wasn't, and then I'll tell a
Mm-hmm.
bit about the journey that got me to where I started to. How's that?
Mm-hmm.
So back in 2002, I was a junior lieutenant, so lowest ranking officer in the officer continuum, and I was leading a team of about 22 soldiers, and we were operating at sea on Navy ships, boarding people smuggling boats that were coming in illegally into Australia. And I wasn't a good leader at that point. So I was only 22 years old, or 21 at the time, hadn't yet turned 22, and most of my team were really young. So they were 18 to 23-year-old soldiers, very new in the army, and I was pretty new as well with not much leadership experience. And so I was actually not leading in a good way. I was wanting to be one of the boys. Like I just wanted to be liked. I didn't want to make the hard decisions. I didn't want to give the clear direction. I wanted people to just have consensus. And that was my thing. Like if we all get it, if we all agree, we'll do it this way. But that's not a good approach because we were doing fairly risky missions. And if I didn't have clear direction and clear guidance and take authority and ownership, things could go wrong. Luckily, we got it. We did okay, and it didn't. But I wasn't communicating like a leader because I wasn't being clear on my intentions. I wasn't giving clear boundaries. I wasn't giving clear guidance. I was not being, I guess, collaborative, but then decisive. I was just trying to eke out consensus in every engagement. So I actually had to I had to look hard in the mirror and take a rain check and go, do I want to get serious about being a leader? And I went to the military academy. I did a whole bunch of training, and then when I got into the aviation space, after this, it wasn't until about 3 years later I then got my next command job. And so I was then leading my peers, which is even harder in some regards than leading a whole team of soldiers who are a lot lower rank. So I was leading as a pilot a group of about 10 pilots. And so I then had to go, well, I need to learn from what I did wrong before, but now my context has shifted. So I need to actually adapt how I lead and communicate now. Even though I'm leading my peers, I still have to employ these good leadership approaches. So that was a big pivotal moment for me as I learned, particularly the first 6 months of that role, in going, all right, I need to bring my team in, get everyone's opinions and thoughts about a particular plan, but then clearly communicate the intent, the decision, and then how we're going to do it and go from there. So I guess a bit of a long-winded story, but it was a progression for me over about 4 to 5 years, going from not being good at it to then trying to do it well in a different context with a unique challenge.
That does sound like a very unique challenge. Were there times when the people that you were leading, because you said they were your peers, were there times where they would challenge your decision? Were there times where they did not agree with what you were saying? Was it a more brave group in the way? Was it a more outspoken group because they were your peers?
Yeah, definitely. And if you know pilots, every pilot has two or three opinions, and they're not afraid to tell you. So, um, that we are outspoken as a general rule, and so I had to take an approach where, all right, let's get in, let's have the debate. Okay, let's have the debate, map it out. But at the end of the day, I'm still the boss, and I have the responsibility for us to make the decision for us to execute. So let's get it all on the table. If you don't agree, lay it out the reason. I'm prepared to change. I'm prepared to change my opinion if it's within the bounds of what we can do. And this is where I I started to really learn intellectual humility, which I think is a really key trait of a leader. And I like to explain it by where you can hold an opinion in your mind that you don't agree with and wrestle with it and hear it out and think about it and think about how you might change your opinion. That's what I think about when I think about intellectual humility. And so holding that and going, all right, yeah, okay, let's weigh it up. All right, yep, your point's valid. Let's change the plan and let's do it this way. And then here's the orders. Let's go. So yeah, it was definitely a learning experience.
That is such an amazing point to bring up, intellectual humility. And I really feel that it comes with age, with wisdom, with experience. I think it's when we're younger and we feel like we have so much to prove, so many people to prove ourselves to, that we feel that our opinions cannot change because people will point at us, people will make us feel like we don't know what we're doing if we change our minds, if we change our opinions. But it's actually the opposite when, like you pointed out, when a leader is actually transparently, ruthlessly open to other people being able to change their mind, they're giving the right positive signals that I'm actually open-minded. I'm actually, following through on these words. I'm not just saying that I'm going to listen to you and then ask you to do things one way anyway. I'm actually saying I'm going to listen to you and I'm going to give you the opportunity to change my mind. And you're going to see it in the actions that we take later, in the strategies that will follow. And getting that bit of actionable proof as a result of that listening exercise, I believe really empowers the team, because they really understand that this leader is not just paying lip service, because it's so on trend to say that. And it's very easy to say that I'm here to listen, I'm here to support you. And the next thing you know, no, you still have to do it. You still have to do it the boss's way. And I've seen so much of that in firsthand, and also just observing some of the people that I've worked with as an agency servicing different kinds of clients. So I really love that concept of intellectual humility. And I think it's by that time where you've had that experience where you realize that the way to really prove yourself to someone else or to your team is by being more of you, more like having less barriers between yourself and them, having fewer barriers between yourself and them. But that also leads me to my next question, because this is something that I love working on with my clients. I love working on crafting their public persona. So crafting specifically like their on-stage presence, or crafting the personality they're going to present on camera, crafting the personality they will use when they are doing a presentation for their team or for senior members. So this is where I think things really get exciting and interesting, because the moment you talk about crafting a personality or crafting a persona, the first thought that comes into your head is, oh, I don't want to lie. I don't want to be someone I'm not. I don't want to be inauthentic. I'm always myself. I always want to be me. But the truth of the situation is, at least from my experience, that yes, you should definitely be you, but you need to pick and choose parts of you to amplify in specific situations to get the best outcomes, specifically when you're communicating in public. So have you gone through a similar thought process where you've crafted the 𝗄𝗎 that you need to present, the 𝗄𝗎 that will then communicate to a team or to your senior management? And what is that persona that you've crafted over time?
Yeah, it's interesting because until we met and started talking about this this podcast, I hadn't thought about doing that deliberately. And I was probably in need of your services, earlier on, because I probably did it more subconsciously than deliberately, and it's probably better to do it deliberately. But when, particularly in my last role, where I was leading a really large team, well, really large for us, 600 people. And every week I would be presenting, I would be standing up and talking to the whole team. And then in specific instances I was giving orders or giving a brief on our next mission or our next phase of what we were doing. And the other ones were more updates and shout outs and also like just informal discussions about where we were going for the next few months, that sort of thing. But I guess what I tried to do in terms of that persona was really stay connected to where my people were at and make that the key point. So I would every week I would spend time walking around the hangars where everyone was working on the aircraft. I would go and fly missions with my teams, so I was actually in there doing the job, or I'd go and connect with the team in the workshop where they're fixing vehicles or something like that. So I could try and have some conversations that weren't formal, and I could understand what was happening. So get out and about, leadership by walking, right? And then when I could stand up in front of everyone, I could say, on Tuesday when I was with Jonesy in the hangar, we were talking about this, and this is what we said, and then this is what this means for where we're going. So trying to connect to where the team's at, what their thoughts are, what their problems are, where they don't have the information that I might have sitting at the top, was what I tried to do. So I tried to be a person that was connected. And if you can be connected, and then how you use that potentially in the first part of when you stand up and what you say initially, and show that connection and show that it's not just lip service. You are actually connected, and you do hear what they're saying, and you have been listening to what everyone is telling you. Then you're crafting connection with the audience straight up. And I wanted to be that person where I could get that connection, because then what you say after that, people are going to listen to. So that's, I guess, the approach that I took in that regard.
That's very cool. You were crafting a persona that was a storyteller and a person who is very well connected. Someone who is, would you say, someone who is kind of from the people, who is very much at ease being in like the midst of his people, doesn't necessarily, and is not afraid of, for example, getting his hands dirty. He's not afraid of actually, getting in there and like working on things himself.
Maybe definitely. I wanted to be the person that was out there alongside my team, not just sitting in the ivory tower and giving out, directions. Yeah, that's what I wanted to be.
That's a great persona to craft. When we were growing up, we heard the story of this king. I believe it was an Indian king, but I could be mistaken, because I don't remember the specifics of this person, but I think it was a true story. And this was something that our teachers loved telling us, that there was this king, and he loved being connected to his people so much that he would go out at night dressed as a beggar, and he would roam the streets and use that to observe people, because people think beggars are invisible and they don't really pay attention to people that don't really seem important. So he would first use that disguise to observe people. And then, of course, he would also see how people would treat him, to kind of get a measure of the kindness of the people that he was ruling over. And our teachers loved telling us that story, because for them, that kind of a leader really stood out, specifically in the Asian context, where it doesn't really happen anymore. It's, you wouldn't have a leader necessarily getting down and dirty and actually being super in touch with his people. You even have, I would say, to an extent, it's actually the opposite, where a lot of times leaders would surround themselves with advisors who actually kind of become an echo chamber and feed whatever they're saying back to them. And it becomes a weird and very unproductive and somewhat toxic environment, where they never hear voices of dissent. They never hear alternate opinions, because they don't think that that's an important kind of feedback loop to establish. So the fact that you were doing all of this, it seems like it wasn't just feeding back stories into what you would like, stories of what you could talk about. It also literally like gives you a very good, it gives you like a pulse on where people are. Are they happy?
Mm,
Are they fulfilled? So it seems like a
yeah,
very good
definitely.
exercise.
Yeah, and great story that you tell from your childhood. And because I used to tell my team, and when I go out and teach leadership, which is my current role now, after I've finished in that command role, I tell people rank doesn't have a monopoly on good ideas, right? Rank doesn't own it. The people at the coalface know the problem better than you when you're a higher rank than they are. So you need to get out and you need to listen, and you also need to create the space for them to tell you and to bring the ideas up, and know that you're going to listen to them. So you have to actually, as a
Mm.
leader, craft the space and then be that person. And otherwise, no one's going to tell you, because people just close their mouth when a senior officer walks around and they're a junior soldier. You have to actually, it's almost harder in the military than it is in business, because you have a natural barrier of rank and authority structure that's visible every day sitting on your uniform. Whereas, potentially in business, depending on the culture, it's more open. So yeah,
Yeah.
rank doesn't have a monopoly on good ideas, but you have to actually prove it.
And that visibility is it's very important to the conversation. You're right. It's built into the system. And I'm sure it's by design, because it is meant to be a physical reminder of what conversations can be had and what conversations cannot be had, at least from the point where at the stage that it was designed. I feel like it was a restrictive measure, a controlling measure. And I don't know if you've heard about the trend now that people like senior leaders and offices are actually discouraged from putting like awards around them or having like newspaper clippings on their walls. It's something that will that people think would discourage the junior people from actually being able to speak freely or disagree with this person. And it seems like they think that those physical reminders would kind of bolster the view that this person is untouchable, this person is elevated, has an elevated status. So there's definitely a divergence there. I don't see that changing in the military anytime soon, but the fact that you're changing behaviors despite those visible signs is already quite encouraging.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't heard about the removing the certificates and things like that. Because I mean, imagine if you flipped it and you put, your people that have succeeded on the wall, right? That would be powerful. So
Mm,
here's employee X who achieved this breakthrough for the company, and there they are. That would be cool.
that's a good point. Yeah, that would be very cool. So you've worked with so many people over your 20 years of being in the military, being in the army. I would really love to know, is there a specific leader that stands out in your memory for being a really great communicator, someone who's very impactful with their words, and someone who maybe you took inspiration from in some way?
Yeah, there's quite a few, and I've worked with all different leaders and different militaries as well, overseas and things. I probably one person that I would call out is our current chief of defense force is General Angus Campbell, who I worked with him when he was the chief of army, and then I've had a number of conversations and done a number of small team activities where he's been part of it. And the way that he communicates, even in a small team, right up to addressing the camera for the nation, is really powerful in how he measures the points that he's bringing out, but also connects to the purpose behind the message. And uh, and I guess it seems that the way he crafts his approach he's connecting to the the perception of the audience in the message for how he's delivering it. And it's kind of a bit hard to explain in that way, but even in a small group where I've been in a seminar with him and we've been asking questions and debating topics, he will use a question to frame his answer, and then he'll help guide you onto the solution, even though he's telling you what he thinks. And I think that's a really powerful way to use a connection with the purpose behind the message and the mentality of the audience to get your point across. And so the way he communicates, I've learned a lot from just by being in a series of different engagements and briefings, and then watching him on camera as he went up to more senior positions. So yeah, I learned a lot from that.
That sounds really cool. I was not expecting you to name someone specific. So that's really cool. I love that you're so in awe of this leader and so inspired by him that you were very 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 kind of transparent about how much you've learned from him. That's really interesting. I would love to see one of his talks sometime. And
Yeah,
just
you'll be able
really,
to pick some off the internet, or and there's a couple of points that, and in fact, I'm guessing it'll be on somewhere on YouTube or on a media broadcast, but where he deliberately moved a bunch of the senior military people out of the camera shot when a reporter was asking political questions of one of the political leaders. And that act of it's in a way it's physical communication, because he's showing that the military leaders are not part of the political debate. We are separate. We serve the government. So he got the chief of army, chief of navy, and moved them out of the way, so then that political discussion could happen on camera. And that was a really powerful thing, because he was understanding what the visual and verbal communication signals of that engagement were, and made the leadership decision to take action. So that was a really good thing.
that's fascinating. And it's so true, because for a lot of our leaders, a lot of times their speeches are actually written by other people. Of course, they would have input on what they want to say, some more than others, but a lot of the times the words that they're saying haven't actually been written by them. But what is entirely up to them is their body language, how they create the whole experience. And definitely part of that is whatever visual cues there are in the whole setup. So that's what really fascinates me, the delivery aspect of it. The words for sure are very interesting too, but at some point the words have been crafted by master storytellers who know what they're doing and they know the right message. But you can really take the same words and deliver them in so many different ways. You can deliver them, like completely, like, in a disconnected robotic fashion where they just seem like words, or you can take the words and breathe life into them. That's what really excites me. That's why my personal passion is really working with people on the delivery aspect of it, because when you really master body language and voice modulation and energy, that's where you really bring whatever you're saying to life. And that really kind of also brings me to my next question, that have you consciously crafted a body language, or are there things that you keep in mind when you're talking to a group of people, when all eyes are on you? Are there specific things you keep in mind to have an impactful body language?
I think that what I often tend to do without thinking is I move too much, right?
Mm.
And you would have seen this, like I'm already doing it in our Zoom call, but I move around the stage or I move around the platform too much, and it can be distracting. And I also often stand, like lean back, when I'm talking, and I use my hands a lot like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually give myself two prompts. And what I do is I draw myself like a box on the ground, or a
Mm.
pattern, and I go, all right, I'm only going here to there. Okay, I'm not going to wander. And unless I'm really trying to make a big point, I might walk right to the front of the stage. But otherwise, I'm going to stay within this area. So I give myself some restrictions, and then I
Mm.
try and stick to that. And then what I also do is I try and lean forward, and I put one foot forward, and try and not lean back and wave around.
Mm.
So I do those things. And I'm naturally quite animated. And so sometimes I need to slow down a lot as well. So
Mm.
I tell myself, restrict my movement, lean forward, and slow down. And that's what I try and do. It doesn't always work,
Mm.
but that's the aim.
Those are amazing things to keep in mind. You're totally on the right track. The movement, especially aimless shuffling, is how I like to call it, is so common. It's something that everyone goes through because I think you're thinking of the next thing to say, and you're so wrapped up that you kind of forget about like your appendages. You just forget that your legs are moving kind of their own accord. And your strategy of creating an imaginary box is spot on, because without knowing it, you're actually doing what we do in the filmmaking world. I say we, even though I'm not a filmmaker anymore, but I've done filmmaking for so long. So in filmmaking, you give actors a mark. You rehearse specific movements, and they know exactly where they need to be stopping. And specifically in shots where you can't see the floor, you'll even take like a red tape and you'll pull like a cross right there where the actor needs to stop, because the camera is following them a certain way and it needs specific moments where the actor stops in a specific place. So it totally works, because then the actor is actually free to be emotive and to be in character, and all they have to remember is when I reach the red dot or the red tape, I stop and I don't need to move anymore. So it completely works. In TEDx, it really works too, because there's a big red dot on the stage, and everyone, of course, people walk around, but that really kind of guides you, and you know that is like the center of the stage. So you can always see that visual cue, and you can choose to even like stay on it and not even go off it if you want. So it's a great strategy. And of course, the hands, always the hands. I mean, I've been speaking in public for like 15 years, and I still catch myself moving my hands about crazily, and I don't know why. It's some kind of mouth to hand connection that I have to express myself verbally. Sorry, I have to express myself physically, not just verbally. Something else that I noticed specifically in interviews is that I would nod a lot. And when I would watch it back, you would just see like this head kind of going up and down. And it was so distracting. And I would think back on, wow, that must have been so distracting for the person who was talking to me. Just those things about your body that you don't notice that become amplified when you're on a stage or on camera. And then you really have to take care of them and really have to be mindful of how everything is going, the words, the body, the actions. So
Definitely. I'm sure I've been nodding like way too much in our conversation here. So now
no.
you're making me subconscious. Self-conscious.
Yeah, I think you have to be, right? It's one of those things. Speaking in public, you have to have actually different degrees of self-consciousness. One that is kind of just looking within, but one that is also like a self-consciousness of how people are perceiving you, trying to actually be in their shoes at the same time. Something that the leader that you mentioned seems to be doing really well in terms of really adapting to specific audiences, being able to speak their language and connect with them. So almost like putting himself in the shoes of his audience and being able to make that impact. So that really helps.
Definitely.
I'm interested in knowing when you're taking a stage, when you're giving a presentation or a talk, how do you feel authoritative? How do you establish that authority? And this is I see the irony or the nuance in asking this question, because we've been talking about how authority is not dictatorial, authority is not black and white. And yet, when you're on a stage, you do have a degree of authority, and you do need to be in that position of power. You're not exactly at the same level as everyone else in the audience. Sometimes literally physically you're elevated on a stage. So is there a way that you assume that authority on a stage?
Yeah, I think that for me, it's often about connecting to the purpose of why you're communicating. So you're there for a reason. You're not there just to fill time. So you're there either to present an argument, a point of view, a story, or you're there to facilitate something or to communicate a plan. So connecting to the audience with the purpose and then making it why you're using the words you are, and why you're using the body language you are, and why you're making the eye contact that you're making, is about communicating the purpose behind what you're trying to say. And if I've got that in my head before I stand up, then it kind of gives me the focal point for the message. I don't know if that makes sense, but it hones me in on why am I doing this? Because this is the outcome from this interaction. And so therefore I'm going to do it like this. And this is what I'm hoping the response of the audience is going to be. And that's why I'm going to pause here. That's why I'm going to look at this person here and this person over here, because I'm connecting to that purpose of the message and the outcome they want to walk away from the engagement with. So that's the approach I take.
That's a great approach. It really makes sense. You're not just talking for the sake of talking. You're not just giving presentation upon presentation because it was part of your job requirement, but because you're looking at specific outcomes that you want to achieve as a result of this speaking or this training or this presentation, and making the process, making that presentation as impactful, as memorable, as engaging as possible helps you achieve that outcome. The more engaged people are, the more attention they pay, the more clear the communication is, the higher the chances of achieving the outcome. So that makes a lot of sense. It's a very direct relationship. Cool.
Yeah, that's it. That's the way I go.
Cool. So my last question, Jamie, is if I was to ask you to give advice, perhaps keeping in mind an emerging leader, or keeping in mind a leader who hasn't spoken in public before, who is looking to speak in public more, what advice would you give them to speak like a leader? You know, just to borrow my mantra, to speak like a leader and not just like a boss. What advice would you give them based on your experience in speaking as a leader?
I'd probably say 3 points. The first one would be what I just mentioned before, is understand the purpose of the communication interaction and really focus on that, because if you know the outcome you're trying to achieve from the team you're talking to, then it shapes everything that you do. The words you use, the approach you take, your demeanor, where the stage or the classroom or the briefing room, it shapes all of that. If you can understand the purpose and the outcome, that's going to help you. The second one is find the connection with your audience. So you need to know what are they thinking, and how does my message link to where they're at. So meet them where they're at in terms of how you're pitching your message, the connection with the audience, and understand what they're thinking. And probably the third thing is understand that people are going to listen, and you need to make the most of it, because you're standing up there. So they're giving you they're giving you their time. So you actually have to make it worthwhile. So prepare, be direct, be clear, don't waffle and take tangential pathways to, fairyland, but actually give your message nice and clear. And so it's focused on the purpose. They're taking away what you're trying to say, and you're connecting with them. And I'd say they're my three things that I would say.
Awesome. Thank you. I love how so much of that connected with the processes that you talked about in terms of, how, because the second part is so important, knowing what your audience is thinking. And, the natural question someone could ask would be like, how do I know what my audience is thinking? But actually you answered that a while ago when you talked about how you make an effort. The times that you're not on that stage, you're making an effort to connect with the people that you're eventually going to be talking to. You're trying to get to know how they're thinking, where they are, what they're feeling. So then it's easier for you to connect to them and actually put yourself in their shoes when you're presenting and when you're talking. So those are fantastic tips.
Probably just to add into that is if you're not talking to the team that you're always leading, but you're speaking at an event or something, you need to actually find the avenue to get into your audience's thinking. So you have to find a way. So whether it's the organizers collecting information, giving you a readout or connecting in with a sample group, or having a survey that targets things that you're going to talk about, or really just understanding the people that you're going to talk to, you have to find that connection. That otherwise you're not going to connect with the audience if it's not your normal team. So that is actually an important thing as a speaker, as a leader, if you want to connect with the audience, to find that connection before you even stand up on stage.
That's a great point. Yeah. And that's something that is inevitable, right? If you want to raise your public profile, if you want to be talking more, for sure, you're going to be talking to people that you don't know, that you've never met before, that you might not get a chance to even say hello to before you go on that stage. So taking the time to understand who are the people that are actually going to be attending, what demographic do they represent, what interest groups, what industry, will really, really help in even shaping the language that you're going to use, in the body language, in the examples and the stories you might bring in the media you might show. I was just coaching someone to give a talk at a sales conference, and they had some really interesting video content in their talk, and you could call that weird / provocative in certain contexts, in more serious contexts. And then this person explained to me, Nausheen, actually, the people that are coming to this conference, they own like gambling businesses. They're doing all kinds of things that are just very informal. And they're the kind of people that will appreciate this kind of image or this kind of story. And I understood that this person was actually taking those steps to understand what their audience will appreciate. So it was risky. It was a risky thing that I would never have advised someone, showing in a business context. Like, he was actually, the videos were really interesting. He showed a video of someone proposing to someone in public and then getting turned down. And he linked it to how you don't want your customer to turn you down if you're proposing to them through your proposition. And then he showed the video of someone else, like a girl proposing to a guy, and then the guy saying yes. And he says, that's what you want to do. So, I can't see that working in some contexts, but for him, he told me, and he had this talk and he said, wow, the feedback was awesome. Like, people were so into it and they really got hooked, because that's what really drew them in. This was so close to what they're already doing. So
wow,
really knowing the audience,
understood his audience.
Yeah, he really understood his audience, and
It's pretty
knowing
good.
the audience really helps you be bold like that, and do things that you wouldn't do in other contexts. And that makes a lot
Yeah.
of sense. If you're talking to a specific audience, you can be more bold, and you can say or show things that are specifically tailored to that audience that might not make sense to other people, might not appeal to other people, might might actually put you at a disadvantage if you're talking in another context. So it helps you be
Mm.
flexible and adaptable, I think.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great story. Yep. I wouldn't have felt that those type of media would actually achieve the outcomes.
Right? Yeah, that's the first thing we
Mm.
think of because yeah, you're kind of thinking of it from your own context. I was thinking of it from the context of the corporate world or just a serious conference. So yeah, yeah, it really pays off. Like you were saying, it really pays off to know your audience ahead of time. That can really make
Mm.
or break that talk or that moment where you're just not sure, but you can be sure if you're just more cognizant of who the audience is.
Definitely, definitely. Very important.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Jamie. It was such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for being so generous with your memories, your experiences, the lessons that you've learned. It was really interesting for me to hear them. And I now feel like I know a little bit more about leadership in the Australian Army than I did before. So thank you so much for that.
Thanks for having me, Nausheen. Great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Looking forward to listening to some of the other guests in the future.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cool.